Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Tarjuman, and I'm honored to continue my conversation with Professor or Assistant Professor Matt Segal from the Philosophy and Religion Department at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. Thank you so much for coming back and talking with me and sharing some of that sweet, sweet philosophy.
Happy to be back for round two.
All right. I think last time we had left off, we were starting to get into, kind of something that, is definitely kind of maybe perhaps the main philosophical issue in pressing on my mind and probably on many others as well, is kind of, the way we're educated and the way we're brought up. It's very easy for us, or at least it's very easy for me to kind of understand God in a sort of principle way, or a sort of like a force of creativity. I actually really like Whitehead's conception of the ultimate as this type of creative aspect to reality, where things just how you can't predict it, and there's this inexhaustible way in which things continue to evolve and change and be created and are created and are creative. So like that makes a lot of sense to me, but I guess I almost think of that as it still almost seems force-like or principle-like. And it's like the God of the philosophers, as they might say. A lot of the kind of classical Muslim theologians, there was like you could say there's the theologians and there's the philosophers, and the Muslim, the theologians would be critical of the philosophers for their God being a sort of, what it does is, God just does this sort of unavoidable or natural, inevitable act of eternal self-contemplation, and everything issues from that. And it's almost like God doesn't have a choice or doesn't have any sort of agency. And that was kind of the main criticism that or one of the main criticisms that the more classical, or what would you call them, scholastic theologians would have of the philosophers. So I guess I'm curious to hear what your and Whitehead's responses to that would be. And I understand Whitehead has kind of an interesting conception of God. So if you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, this is such a huge but fascinating issue. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you about it, and we'll see where we can end up. I think. So yeah, Whitehead's a metaphysician, and his theology is very much, I think, easily portrayed by those who would situate themselves in a particular religious tradition, a theistic tradition, interested in relating to a personal God. They would see Whitehead's as very much a understanding of God as a principle. He does distinguish between creativity as such, which is his ultimate principle, and God, which he says is the primordial creature of creativity. And so right off the bat, you've got a very unorthodox view of God as a creature of creativity, not just any creature, the primordial creature that sort of sets the tone for the rest of creation. And God is also an infinite creature, whose, in Whitehead's terms, whose concrescence never perishes, and so there's an everlastingness to the divine nature. But Whitehead and also
concrescence, for people who aren't familiar, is kind of like the coming to get the synthesis of everything that goes into making what something is, and it becomes something new in a way. So is that a good way of summing it up, would you say?
Right, exactly. So in the finite world, concrescence is kind of the engine of novelty. And so a concrescence arises and perishes, and the universe grows in this bud-like way as new concrescences are added to the cosmos, the cosmic process. But the divine, as an everlasting concrescence, never perishes, and so is just sort of always in this process of growth and enrichment. As the universe unfolds within the divine is enriched by that growth, but never perishes. And so there's this tension in Whitehead's view of God between these two poles. The primordial pole, which he says is eternal and unchanging and very much like a principle. And then there's the consequent pole, which is God not as impassive and eternal, but as very much passive and all loving, you could say, receiving everything that happens in the universe and making it whole, atoning for things that in the finite world may seem disconnected, disjointed, even evil. The consequent nature of God plays this role of receiving everything that happens and somehow atoning for it by putting it in the context of some larger beauty. And so I think there's room in Whitehead's view of the divine, though, for a more personal conception of the divine, particularly in the consequent nature of the divine. And so what Whitehead was attempting to do was provide a metaphysical language or a scheme wherein multiple religions, and hopefully, I mean, his goal would be to say all of the world religions and wisdom traditions could find something in it that they recognized, even if Whitehead's not speaking specifically and in particular to particular traditions. He's nonetheless aiming at least to provide a common language in terms of which we can talk to each other about the nature of ultimate reality. And so that's the goal. Whether or not he succeeds remains to be seen. But yeah.
I mean, I definitely found. I read. Well, I guess I've listened to some of your lectures, and I read Religion in the Making upon your recommendation. And I can definitely say there's some very interesting kind of or very promising sort of resonances, and particularly the Islamic Neoplatonists or Neoplatonists of all sorts. I think there's a lot of resonances there with some of the Neoplatonists, like I'm thinking of like Ismaili Neoplatonists, who I've kind of learned about through the work of Khalil Andani, who's been doing a lot of great stuff online. He he pointed, the Ismaili philosophers would explain, that like sometimes when it's referring to God in the Quran or something, it's referring to the active intellect, and some or maybe the qalam, the first creation of God is the pen, is the qalam, is the pen, but that's the active intellect, and then there's they would, from my understanding, they would explain instances of God being mentioned as maybe kind of like God as we experience him or something, like because there's the essence of God, which is sort of like untouchable in certain ways, and then there's like layers of God that you could kind of call God in this sort of a practical way, that really kind of resonates with
Right.
With Whitehead's thing about the creativity, and then the maybe the next layer you could say is I guess, would you say the not the consequent nature of God? What was the first one? The
Primordial nature.
The primordial. So would that be kind of like the next layer to Whitehead's cosmology, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect fit, but you could very easily at first pass relate in the Neoplatonic emanationist scheme. You could say the one is creativity, the intellect, the nous is the primordial nature, and the world soul is the consequent nature. But this is not a perfect match because Whitehead's not an emanationist.
Okay.
He's trying to hold a balance between what we would call emanation and emergence. He's not just a bottom-up thinker either, as some conceptions of it. He wants both. In so many ways, he always wants both. And so you could complain that he's not taking a side and sort of feigning neutrality on these questions, but I really do think he's a thinker. He always thinks in terms of polarities, and he wants us to hold the tension between these polarities and accept that rational thought has limitations when it runs up against opposites, and that in some mysterious way opposites coincide, as many mystical traditions would suggest. And he wants us to take that very seriously.
Yeah, I guess the way I'm understanding, or the way I try to explain it to people, I guess, is it's like, or well, I guess one example is like the wind. You don't see the wind, but you see how the wind affects things, or like, but it's deeper than that when you're trying to get to kind of like divine realities where it's like, well, I can, the fact that I can perceive beauty, for instance, like you can't really perceive what allows you to perceive beauty, but you can kind of realize that there's something going on there. Like we're not just hallucinating. If beauty were some sort of completely subjective thing, then it would just be like random where we perceived beauty, right?
Yeah.
And if it
Yeah.
were objective, then you'd be able to like measure it with a machine. But because
Right.
neither of those is the case, it's somewhere in between where it's like, it becomes kind of paradoxical in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like light, like we never see light itself. We
Right.
see
Mm-hmm.
its reflection off of darkness. We see,
Mm-hmm. Right.
which is
Mm-hmm.
color. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so another, I guess, um, yeah, there's so many examples of like these sort of paradoxical things, especially when you get to the level of God. I the the more you kind of abstract, or the more kind of like higher concepts you pursue them, the more they kind of like become indistinguishable from one another. And one prominent example that really sticks out to me is, or rather one that I've just been thinking about recently, is the difference between kind of like choice and nature. So when you think of we tend to think in the sublunar world, or the mundane world, we tend to think of like, oh, a rock doesn't behave by choice; it just follows the laws of nature, and its own the laws of nature and its nature kind of just determine what it does. And then we have human beings that like think and make choices, and we have this kind of dichotomy. um but when you get to like the level of God, it's kind of like, well, God is like almost choosing his own nature, and you have plenty of like scriptural things that kind of say this sort of thing, where nature, innate inevitable nature becomes sort of indistinguishable, or the distinction between it becomes meaningless, because at the level of God,
Mm-hmm.
so like for instance, there's like Islamic scriptures that say like, God has God has made it a kind of a rule upon himself that his mercy will overcome his wrath,
Mm-hmm.
in the end. For instance, like there's no objective, quote unquote, or inevitable, logically necessary reason why the universe should exist the way it is, or God should do X, Y, Z. And so at a certain level, it's like he must make a choice in some sense, but then if he's all powerful and there's no like limitations to his power, then like he must be sort of choosing his own nature in a way, and thus the nature of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be? And I think that would, Whitehead would. How would Whitehead explain that, or how would we fit that into his schema,
Yeah.
if you will?
Yeah. Well, I mean, traditionally, the most theological conceptions of God are as necessary being, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, because of this notion of omnipotence, there's a sense in which we want to see God as capable of breaking any rule, even 1 + 1 equaling 2. If God's all
Mm-hmm.
powerful, that could change if God willed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Whitehead is a Platonist in the sense that, or a Neoplatonist in the sense that he sees the power of the divine is limited by truth, beauty, and goodness, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that these ideals are not other than the divine nature, but the divine is in some sense, in Whitehead's view, the primordial nature of God does not create these ideals.
Mm-hmm.
They exist, and God wills them. God loves them. God, in some ways, creates the possibilities for the world through them, right? So truth,
Mm-hmm.
beauty, and goodness are in some sense co-eternal with the divine in
Mm-hmm.
Whitehead's view. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one of Whitehead's really probably the sharpest criticism he has for anything philosophical or theological is the idea, the image, which he thinks is idolatrous, of God as some kind of emperor or Caesar or czar who is wielding force as if, if God is really all powerful. It's kind of strange that God would need to intervene in the world that God created to make sure that things happen as they should, because shouldn't it all be set up perfectly in advance? So the idea of an intervention is God that reaches in to resist force with force, Whitehead thinks is idolatrous, and it just comes from our social and political imaginaries, and it gets projected onto the nature of the divine. And so he would much rather view power, if we're going to use that term, in terms of persuasion, in terms of beauty. Like the divine is just so beautiful that of course we're going to obey, in the sense that we're just drawn to it by the persuasive power rather than having to be pushed. Right.
Yeah. And that's a really, like, those two kind of those two ideas, the idea of, the necessity of intervention in the world versus, attraction by beauty or what have you, is like two very powerful forces you see kind of playing out within religion, as far as like, how should we be doing religion? You have some people who are just, like, no, we have to set up the rules so that people have to do the right thing. And then others are like, no, like, why would you? Then they're not doing it for the right reasons or whatever. So it has to be more, attracting people to the good by showcasing its beauty and acting it out, and of course, you get, and of course you get issues where, like, if you're running a society, you do have to, for instance, prevent harm and things like that. So, so there's all sorts of, I guess, interesting questions that arise with how these ideas kind of play themselves out in the world too.
No, absolutely. And the deeper question for me that Whitehead doesn't really address explicitly is the why of creation. Why would the divine create a world, and not just create a world, but a world with human beings created in God's image? And it seems to me that there is something about the divine nature, if we say it's necessary being, that lacks freedom, and in some way, the human being is the divine's way of attempting to create the possibility of freedom. But it's not something that can be forced, obviously, because freedom is not forced.
Right.
Freedom must be achieved as sort of as an act of love. And it seems to me, and this is sort of my personal theology, I guess, that the divine created free beings, at least human beings with the capacity to be free, so that love, like actual love, could enter the world, right? Love that's not forced, love that is freely chosen. Because any being that is compelled to love is not actually loving, I would say.
Right. Here, I know this.
Speaking of love.
She's gonna join us here for a little bit, but maybe I'll just have to take the video off or something, because I know she's not supposed to be on the internet yet. But anyway, that's a very interesting tying of the purpose of creation as being towards freedom. I've definitely encountered the idea in various religious traditions, and from the Islamic tradition, there's a famous hadith Qudsi, a speech of God, saying that I was a hidden pearl and loved to be known, or would have liked to be known, would have loved to. I'm trying to translate it. And it is the same word for love. So in the sense of like loving beauty, loving something about something, loving a quality of something. And so I would have loved to be known, and so I created the creation so that I would be known. And that word, and in the Sufi tradition, the fact that it says loved to be known is like, kind of brought out as very important. So there's that, it's
Mhm.
kind of this combination of love and knowledge is become important themes in that.
Yes.
But yeah, freedom, yeah, freedom. Freedom. I hadn't thought about it in that way. And in part, I was actually just kind of given I received a better framework for thinking about freedom just recently. Because, in America, we often are fed this, the way freedom is often talked about is just like lack of constraint, lack of constraint, in the way it plays out is just often ends up being this sort of like, well, imagine how awesome my life would be if all the things that annoy me and constrain my behavior were inverted or imagined away in some sense. And anyway, it just becomes it's not I don't think it's the way we talk about it in America is often very not helpful. But anyway, uh, um, the I heard, I think it was John Vervaeke. I heard him talking recently, and he said something about freedom is not total lack of constraint. It's about full participation. And I was like, that's a much
Yeah.
better, like, and that seems to jive with a lot of ancient conceptions of freedom as well, because the word freedom is used in a lot of ancient societies and what have you, and they clearly don't mean total lack of constraint or any total lack of like you can it almost, I mean, yeah, I think I've said enough without rambling. So so yeah, that's a very would that kind of fit into Whitehead's conception of freedom, and could you elaborate on how that
Yeah.
would work into creation, I guess?
Yeah. So in the first part of his book, Adventures of Ideas, Whitehead traces the gradual dawning of the idea of freedom in European history, and suggests that if you go back far enough, like to ancient Egypt, that they didn't even have an inkling of the idea of freedom. It just didn't occur to them in the context of their societies that should be a value, or even what it would mean. But that gradually this idea developed. And I think initially freedom or liberty really had a negative meaning. It meant not a slave. if you're free, if you're not a slave. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in the contemporary American context, you're absolutely right. Freedom typically means non-interference. It's negative freedom from state imposition or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And what's not talked about very much is positive freedom, which would be more the freedom to develop oneself, the freedom to enter into community, the freedom to turn to the divine. That is more of a demanding kind of freedom, not in the sense that you're being told what to do, like a demand, but in the sense that it requires something of you, right? It's not just leave me alone. It's I must
Mm-hmm.
become someone,
Mm-hmm.
capable of love, for example. Um, and that type of freedom is, I think, historically is what makes religious communities so important, because it's in that context that one can cultivate a form of love as a free deed that challenges you to overcome your egocentric desires to enter into a larger project, larger than yourself. And so in Whitehead's view, this idea of freedom has been intensifying, becoming more conscious, and it has brought great political and social changes in its wake. And this process is still ongoing, and it's very easy to mistake the import of the idea by reducing it to what you were describing, the way that it's popularly understood in an American context. And because it gets understood, interestingly, it's not, I was going to say it's a more secular understanding of freedom as freedom from government interference or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually a lot of sort of evangelical Protestants in the US who uphold that very idea of freedom. Whereas I think there's a deeper understanding of freedom that can be held in a authentically religious context, whereby the freedom, like, what is our freedom for ultimately? And I would say our freedom is for committing to building a more just and loving society. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that would be Whitehead's view as well.
Right, because I like, to me, a lot of times that sort of negative freedom, when taken to its extreme, just ends up being, what, roving warlords, like,
Right.
which, I don't think that, I don't think that's what people are hoping for, but I think they just, yeah, the idea of freedom is yeah, if it's kind of narrowly focused on just whatever is kind of the emotionally charged political
Yeah.
conflict of the time or what have you,
Yeah.
without really, but yeah.
Right. I think it's important too to recognize moral development, and each individual human being, as they come into the world, kind of recapitulates or lives through again the development of the whole species. Right. And so I think there's a moment in human history and in individual development when rules are really important. And these rules are not just arbitrary, right? They've been developed and honed over the course of many millennia by communities, because they keep things more or less ordered. Not that there can't be, laws that are unjust on occasion, but generally speaking, rules are really important. But as a stage of moral development, you can't end there, because if you end there, there's no room for freedom. You're just compelling people to obey, and they obey because they're afraid of the consequences of breaking the law or breaking the rules.
Right.
And that's not, that doesn't allow for full human development, to where I think the ideal, the goal would be for human beings to not just follow the rules, which I think often even a morally highly developed person is generally going to follow the rules of society and the laws generally. But there's a higher intuition of the source of these laws that allows someone to act from a place of the free intuition of the source of the law, rather than just obeying a law. And I think that source is something like love, like divine love, right? And but it's kind of tricky to institutionalize this, or to it's like something you can only recognize in someone else, that you can't quite come up with a formula to say, oh, well, in this case, because of your intuition of the source of the moral law, you can act freely in the way you see fit, and break the rules. It's not as easy as that, but it's clear enough. I think most people, I hope, would agree that moral development goes beyond just rule following. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's it's like, I guess you kind of see what the law is pointing at or what have you, and then kind of function freely within that world that you've come to see under the guidance of the rules.
Right.
Something like that. Now, with so I guess, so kind of going back to the idea of like God intervening or imposing or what have you versus persuading, wouldn't there be, isn't there almost a form of imposition from God, in the sense of, there's so much that we can't choose, there's so much about how the world is created and set, and isn't there a certain degree to which kind of like that is a sort of decree from God, like, this is the world as it is now, act freely within it, but there is still an aspect of kind of like coming to terms with that decree. How would Whitehead and yourself understand that?
So I think Whitehead's kind of inheriting in part this tradition of negative theology that in Nicholas of Cusa gets articulated in this way, that the divine is posse ipsum in Latin, or possibility itself. And so in Whitehead's view, what the primordial nature of God does is sort of decide upon the field of possibility within which the actual world can then unfold. So God doesn't determine what's actually going to be realized. God determines the possibilities that would be best for realization. Now, the decisions on what to realize, what to actualize, that's up to finite creatures. God is sort of, Whitehead says, God acts in the world as an initial aim in the concrescence of each finite creature, telling that creature or holding up a mirror to that creature to reflect back its own greatness, like what it could be in that moment. But the creature is ultimately making that decision.
Like the contours of possibility in a way are kind of
set,
but the
the contours of possibility
are kind of are what God's creation is, and then we're kind of acting within that.
We're acting within that, and but not determined by it, right? Possibilities don't determine, they guide.
Right.
They guide. They lure would be Whitehead's word. And so
you can definitely see that. You can definitely tell he's working with quantum physics with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, indeterminism and
I mean, that's what the probability waves are, right? They're contours of probability or contours of possibility, basically.
Right. Yeah. And what gets actualized, Whitehead would say, is not determined by God. God does not have the power to determine what is actualized in Whitehead's view.
Do the particles choose? Like, does the photon kind of based on these possibilities, do the photons make choices?
Not conscious choices, but yes, they would be making decisions rooted in a non-conscious form of what he calls prehension, which is non-conscious feeling, if you want.
Okay, non-conscious, and non-conscious as in not having. I guess, could you define what you mean by
photon wouldn't recognize
there?
itself in a mirror, in other words. It's not aware.
Right. So not metacognitive or whatever, but he would say, because it's having an experience, he would say there's like qualia there, right? Or maybe in a reduced form or something.
Yeah. Yeah, there is experience of something qualitative. For Whitehead, he refers to it as aesthetic realization, that this capacity for the seeking after harmony and beauty is basic in nature at every scale, and at the human level, we have self-consciousness of this desire for beauty and harmony, but even photons, it's easier to imagine perhaps single cells have desires. They have they want to avoid toxins and seek food, right? And that but they also want to thrive, and it's not just survival that's driving the evolutionary process for Whitehead. It's the desire for more intense experience, more beauty, in other words.
Okay. What's something I've been kind of trying to, I have a good friend who's big into psychoanalytics and the tradition of Freud and Lacan particularly, and while I find a lot of their stuff interesting and compelling, one thing that has always kind of bugged me, and maybe this is a little unfair to ask of them, but often I'm kind of like, I've yet to find a satisfactory explanation of what desire is, and I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, the tendency with Freudians is to sort of explain everything as a function of sexual desire and its repression, everything about human culture and consciousness. And I think that's
or just libido. Like, libido can be a type of life energy. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, I don't think, but I mean, it's definitely that, that's maybe where it's often powerfully manifest, but
sure. Fair enough. And then there's the death drive as well, but to kind of return to the oceanic feeling of oneness. So desire, or eros in Whitehead's view is this, it's a thirst for heightened satisfaction, where the heightened satisfaction comes through integrating more possibilities that might at first appear in conflict, integrating them by bringing them into contrast, that heightens the intensity of the satisfaction. And so the divine in Whitehead's view is seeking ever more intense experience, which means ever more diversity held in unity or in harmony.
That's pretty Freudian, or pretty yeah, that's pretty well, you said, I guess you said that's eros, right? That's Whitehead's explanation of eros.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems to jive pretty well with the psychoanalytics, I feel like. Although, I mean, it goes deeper, or at least in my experience of the explanation. But yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense. Yeah, that synthesis of the tensions,
Right.
and that's and I guess so I guess, and maybe I'm not understanding fully here. So I often find that explanations of desire then are kind of homuncular, in the sense that it's like, well, it's the desire to do this. So are you saying, is he saying it's the desire to, is desire the desire to synthesize the tensions? Or so there's something deeper, like, is the synthesis of the tensions what makes life energy, I guess? Or how would you,
Yeah, well, I mean, this
make
is
it non-homuncular?
Whitehead's accused of offering a homuncular explanation by some people, like Terence Deacon, an anthropologist and biologist. But you know, Whitehead's just trying to point out that there's no escape from this metaphysical problem, which is a problem he resolves with his theology. And he says you need a standard. You need a standard of beauty that sets the universe in motion towards it. And that without that standard of beauty, which in Whitehead's system is the primordial nature of God, you don't know what, there's nothing desire is aiming at ultimately, right? It becomes arbitrary to say, if there's no standard of beauty, ultimate infinite beauty, what is desire aiming at ultimately? And Whitehead would say that desire at every level is aiming at the perfection realized eternally by the divine nature. But it's an infinite perfection that creatures cannot fully realize, but nonetheless we desire to.
Yeah. So the so yeah, I guess I often think of it as kind of like this, like beauty, which, you know, I guess love is sort of is a motion towards beauty. Maybe you could understand it as, right? And like beauty to me, it seems like a direction. Like it's not a thing that but it's like a direction, kind of like, you know, I don't know, you see like a bunch of different plants all blossoming upward, you know, and it's like, it's not really something in common about them per se, but they're moving in a direction. It's kind of how I think of I think a lot of qualities or universals, you could say, are ultimately something like that. And so I guess what I'm saying is, like, I'm sympathetic to that there needs to be some sort of, maybe not a standard, but like a, you know, it is a true universal in a sense, not in the, perhaps not in the way we usually think of it, but yeah, like I said, almost like a direction. So that makes sense to me. But I guess, can we describe, you know, we tend to explain desire from the perspective of, you know, someone experiencing desire and moving toward, or conscious beings that have this image of what we want in the future and moving toward it. But like, if we take out that conscious mental element, or at least the detailed version of it that we have, and think of it in terms of, yeah, I don't know, like a single-celled organism or what have you, like, how can we explain desire? Like the only way I can think of explaining desire in something like that would have to be like possibilities, like the different possibilities are kind of like competing to manifest themselves. and whichever one, so whichever one kind of like, do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah. Nature,
I
what?
guess because and in part I'm doing that because I'm following perhaps I'm obsessively following the necessity to do bottom up thinking, which maybe is misguided, but I'm just curious what you respond to that.
Well, it's an important criterion to consider always, how this might be explained in an evolutionary or emergentist way, even if
Mm-hmm.
one ultimately needs to make reference to something pulling from above.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, there is an element of competitiveness in nature, and often disagreements arise as to what is most beautiful or desirable in communities of creatures.
Well, and within a creature as well, right? Like
With
that's
even, yeah,
because
well,
like
every, yeah.
the reason I desire to do something is because it's manifesting itself as the most beautiful thing I could do right now, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could have an internal conflict that makes
Mm-hmm.
you sort of somewhat indecisive. Um, so every organism is composed of smaller organisms, each with its own sense of what's most beautiful. And the good news is nature has a tendency to be in tune. And so multicellular organisms are possible, which is a miraculous fact that I think needs
Mm-hmm.
more explanation than a bottom-up account can really provide. I
Mm-hmm.
would suggest, because we know like things like cancer can disturb that process of attunement, uh,
Mm-hmm.
like in the human body. But
What would be an example of a top down process that we can just because, yeah, again, my I'm trained to think primarily in a bottom up way, so sometimes it's hard for me to even make sense of a bottom down process as a sort of plausible thing to me. So yeah, could you give a good example of that?
yeah, so Whitehead has his realm of eternal objects. They're the Platonic
Mm-hmm.
ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
he's in some ways inverting Plato. He doesn't give preeminence to this realm of ideas. He gives preeminence to the realm of actual experience. But nonetheless, there is this realm of what he also calls their pure potentials. And as the universe evolves, and you could say in a kind of bottom-up way, that evolution resolves or differentiates that realm of eternal objects as possibilities, because in some ways as the universe evolves, possibilities are ingressing and becoming actual. And in the course of the evolution of the biosphere on Earth, there's this anthropic human potential that's been ingressing gradually to give rise to the vertical form and the refined capacities for linguistic communication and all the other things we associate with the human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as it's as though as
Right.
that, let me say, divine likeness becomes more
Mm-hmm.
actualized, we become able to perceive the potential more clearly. And so
Right.
the potential didn't come from the bottom up, from
Mm-hmm. Right.
natural selection or something. The potential was there, and or the history of life on Earth gradually ingressed it, would be Whitehead's
Yeah.
term,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. And made it
Um,
visible, manifested it, made it
incarnated
visible.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. 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 All right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I think so yeah, I think we were talking about desire, and
Yeah.
I kind of interrupted you there.
So Whitehead is, perfectly willing to admit that there is evil in the world, but his
Mm-hmm.
view of evil is not as this thing that could be eliminated, because for him there is evil in the world because creativity is constantly sort of like waves crashing on the shore, washing away the achievements of order to make way for something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in any given moment in history, novelty can erupt in a way that is somewhat untimely, out of season, and it can destroy the social habits or the natural habitat in which it arises. And so naturally, we would call that evil. But Whitehead's point would be that these eruptions of novelty that are out of season may and often do in the longer term contribute to greater harmonies, more intense forms of organization that arise to sort of deal with the rupture, heal that rupture, and because they have experienced it, are now in a more advanced state of organization so as to prevent that from happening again in a way. There's the best example of this dynamic that I know of in literature is J.R.R. Tolkien's Silmarillion. Are you familiar with that?
I know of it. I haven't read it.
It's the background of the Lord of the Rings. It's the creation story, right. And basically Iluvatar, or Allfather, the Godhead, has all of these sort of angelic beings, the Ainur, singing this beautiful harmony. And there's this one angel that's, or Ainur, that's so powerful and intelligent and creative, Melkor, who breaks away from the choir of angels and wants to sing his own tune in honor of the Allfather of Iluvatar, but it sort of breaks the harmony initially of the chorus of angels. And some of the angels are like, oh, that's a cool song, I'm going to go sing that instead. And it creates chaos in heaven, as it were. But Iluvatar's response is not to vanquish Melkor and say bad angel, but to out harmonize, to change the melody to incorporate what Melkor had introduced. And every time this happens, Melkor is like, no, I don't want to be part of that chorus, I want to do my own thing. And Iluvatar just out contextualizes by saying yes to whatever the notes that Melkor's adding and creating this grander symphony, right? And so that's kind of how Whitehead sees the creative advance and God's role in dealing with these rebellious attempts to create something that's out of harmony with the existing social order. It's in some ways, evil is perfectly natural. And rather than thinking we need to vanquish or could vanquish it, it's just part of how creation occurs. Right?
Yeah, wow, that's really powerful. That's a really powerful myth there. I like it a lot. Nice. Yeah.
And this doesn't mean don't resist evil. In finite particular circumstances, obviously that's sometimes necessary, but it as a metaphysical picture that allows us to understand the role of evil in creation, I think it can help diffuse the spiraling cycles of violence,
the deeper levels of anxiety about these things. Yeah. I think before this I think I was starting to get we talked about the we're talking about the kind of the decreed nature of certain aspects of reality. Could you briefly remind me of what we were saying about that? I think I can't remember.
God lays down the possibility, the contour of possibility.
Oh, okay. Right. But I guess possibility is even like that is still somewhat of a constraint, if you will. Even if you're free to act within it, I guess it's still a type of decree in a way. You know what I'm saying? I guess I guess I don't know what I'm asking. I guess I'm subconsciously maybe trying to just sort of like make this jive with various scriptural elements or what have you.
Sure. It's a limitation imposed on what would otherwise be infinite, undifferentiated chaos, in a sense. Creativity without this divine limitation, laying down this field of possibilities and what would be most desirable and most beautiful, would just be chaos, and finite creatures couldn't make any sense of it. And so finite
creatures wouldn't even be possible, really.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, I guess that's kind of, when you confront, like when you really think about questions like, well, could God change 1 + 1 = 2? It's kind of like, well, yeah, but then we wouldn't even be able to ask. Like, that's just so divorced from the reality that we're in that I just can't, like, you can't even speak of that, or think of that.
Or changing the laws of physics willy-nilly. To me, when theologians argue that God can do stuff like, make make my mug of tea just lift off the table and fly into the ceiling. I'm like, okay, but if God can do that and is doing that all the time in different ways, then it puts us in a situation as human beings where we can't know anything. With science, it goes out the window, right? Because God's arbitrarily breaking the laws of physics all the time. It seems to me that
Or at
if
least
God were
you could just
truly
have,
all
I mean, our knowledge of physics and everything is kind of probabilistic anyway. So I guess you could just say like,
sure,
well,
sure,
we're 99% sure that XYZ is going to happen because of our experiments. And the 1%, can say 1%, you can either say, well, it's a kind of improbable quantum event, or you can say, well, God could make a miracle happen. I guess to me, it's kind of similar. I don't know, where they're somewhat
yeah.
compatible. I guess
I agree with you.
the type of exceptions that might happen are maybe a bit different. The type of exceptions to the rule that we might expect would be a bit different, I guess, depending on your worldview. Is it
sure,
random teleportations here and there, or is it a guy walking on water or something?
right. I suppose if I just imagine if God were to be truly all powerful, that everything would be set up in advance so as to work as desired rather than having the need to intervene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm very impressed
think,
by your multitasking, by the way.
Oh, well, she's a pretty chill kid, so she's not too bad. But the one there was something. I was about to. I had it. Where were we going to go? We were talking about the decreeing of things. Whoops. Okay, 1 second. This is something I do in an interview.
Yeah.
لا دي مش لعبة. Okay. عايزة تقعدي معي؟ Okay. القلم فين؟ Let's see, where were we? The decreeing of things. I was getting things to jive with the scriptures, with the decreedness of things, and the decreeing of possibilities and the freedom to act within that. Yeah, I lost my train of thought there. I guess one thing, maybe this was what I was going for, was so in one thing that really kind of struck me. I remembered it. Okay, 2 things we could talk about. I know how are we doing on time? I know you have
I have a meeting at 11:30. So
okay.
If we can try to wrap up around 11:15, 11:20.
Okay, so let's hit the bigger question first, and then maybe we'll have time. But I'll just briefly mention. I really appreciated, in Religion in the Making, the way that Whitehead brings together the physical and the aesthetic. I thought was very, very insightful in the sense that like vibrations. What is a vibration? It's this abstraction that's at the very heart of physics and kind of they're the very base of physics. Yeah. And what is it essentially? It's this kind of like balancing or synthesis, you could say, of contrast and similarity, and that is kind of what an aesthetic experience is. And so like I really appreciated how he showed that aesthetics is kind of at the heart of, or something very like aesthetics is at the heart of physics.
Yeah, such an important point.
So then the bigger thing I wanted to get to is so how like if we were to posit or maybe Whitehead even did this himself, I'm not sure, does Whitehead, if we were to do a Whiteheadian mysticism, how would we experience and witness God as human beings? What type of practices, or what type of things will we be looking for in order to experience and be aware of God and his activity in the Whiteheadian framework?
I think it's maybe a disappointingly obvious answer in some ways, but we would expect to see God manifest and revealed in prophets and saints and in acts of kindness, however small, or acts of sacrifice, however large they may be, and so the evidence of God, and from a Whiteheadian point of view, would be human deeds which are beyond any egocentric motivation, right? And so divine action,
where you see beauty kind of like exerting force on the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe exerting force is exactly the wrong word. The beauty drawing the world in,
influencing the world. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Here, 1 second. Sorry. يلا تعالي القلم والورقة فين؟ يمكن بيبي عايزة دي سيارة. واو. هترسمي بده؟ لا اوكي. هتقعدي معي؟ عايزة ايه؟ بدك حفاظتك؟ نعم؟ اوكي استني دقيقة انا جاي. Okay. Well, I think she's starting to Mumina is tiring of this conversation.
Yeah.
So I think I may need to take her upstairs in a minute here. Yeah, she's trying to get upstairs. Okay. But yeah, I think yeah. So Whitehead we would see God acting through the gravitational pull of beauty in the world, in a sense.
Yes.
And yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and so his example, or his, the myth and the idea you gave of, taking those bits of evil or disharmony and then kind of finding a grander harmony to put those within. I mean, we definitely see that in cognitive. You definitely see that in cognitive human development, etc. Yeah. And you definitely see it in ecosystems. And I guess the way, like the type of cynical, it does seem that they're like, it does seem hard to see it on like a universe scale, I guess, because usually people think of like, well, the heat death, everything's just going to end up in a black hole or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess maybe that's a good question to end on is, I guess, what would Whitehead have a response to that sort of thing?
Well, love, the capacity for love to organize the world is a gradually deepening, developing possibility. And mm-hmm. So when you're talking about the gravitational, universal gravitation, getting the planets to revolve around the sun in a certain way, that's an early example of how, I mean, Plato says this in Timaeus, that what keeps the planets in their orbits is their friendship for one another, mm-hmm. their love for one another. Mm-hmm. And the harmonization is like, imagine a foreign body, a planet that got flung out of some other solar system, mm-hmm. coming into ours. If it didn't hit another planet, it's gradually going to find its harmony with all the other planetary bodies around the sun. And so that would be an early kind of primitive example of the work of love in the world to bring things into harmony, despite the fact that there's this other element of creativity constantly pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but thanks so much for talking with me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And yeah, we'll have to, I'll get this posted as soon as I can, and
always
send you
more
the links
to talk
and
about.
whatnot.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. Hopefully we can stay in touch.
All right, Matt. Sounds good.
All right. Take care.
Talk to you.
Як тузе, jak tu se, tu go sade, sjåle, kalkon, pisjak, tu go sade.